Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because we're about to embark on a fascinating deep dive into the hidden layers of Alexandre Dumas' most famous revenge novel. We're going to unpack the anatomy of a real masterpiece, peeling back the pages to discover the history, the psychology, and the hidden societal critiques packed right into the heart of the Count of Monte Cristo.
Okay, let's kick things off with a question that might just completely change how you look at this classic book. What if the world's greatest revenge story wasn't actually fiction? I mean, what if I told you that the ultimate literary revenge fantasy has dark, bloody, true crime origins? Well, it's completely true. And looking at the real-life events that inspired Dumas gives us a whole new appreciation for his protagonist's meticulously planned vengeance.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the true crime inspiration, the real Edmond Dantès, before stepping inside the grim walls of the Chateau. Then, we'll talk about the serialized sensation, unpack the actual mechanics of retribution, explore Orientalism as a weapon, and finally, measure the ultimate cost of vengeance.
Section 1. The real Edmond Dantès, the true crime inspiration.
It is literally staggering to see how perfectly the fiction maps onto reality here. Take our fictional Edmond Dantès, right? Betrayed by jealous friends, locked away in the Chateau, mentored by Ave Faria. Now compare him to his real-life counterpart, a guy named Pierre Picot. Picot was a 19th century shoemaker from Nimes, France. Back in 1807, just as he was about to marry a very wealthy woman, three of his so-called friends got jealous and falsely accused him of being an English spy. So instead of the Chateau, Picot was thrown into the Fenestrelle fortress for 7 long years, and instead of Ave Faria, he befriended a wealthy Italian priest named Father Torri. I mean, the parallels are just undeniable.
And it gets crazier. Just like Dantès, Picot inherited a vast Milanese treasure from his dying priest friend. But Picot's real-world revenge, it was incredibly brutal. Step 1, he flat-out murdered one of his betrayers, Chaubart. Step 2, he burned down the restaurant of another betrayer, Lupian, because, why stop at murder when you can throw in a little arson too? Step 3, he poisoned Solari. And step 4, he actually stabbed Lupian to death. Ultimately, Picot was captured by an accomplice and died of his injuries, but not before dictating a deathbed confession straight to the French police. The raw brutality of this true story is exactly what planted the seed in Dumas' mind.
Moving on to Section 2, inside the Chateau d'If, the island fortress.
The Chateau, situated just off the coast of Marseille, wasn't even originally a prison at all. In 1516, King Francis I decided to build it strictly to guard the western entrance to the Kingdom of France. Construction finished up in 1531, and by 1536, it proved its worth by successfully deterring an attack from Francis's big rival, Charles V. But soon after that, it transitioned into an occasional prison. It was essentially Marseille's answer to Alcatraz, centuries ahead of its time, and ironically, it wasn't until 1880, well after Dumas's novel made it a global household name, that it officially opened up to the public.
Now, survival in this fortress literally boiled down to one thing: cold, hard cash. Down at the bottom, in the underground dungeons, you had the poor. They were locked in dark, damp cells, totally teeming with vermin, and honestly, they rarely survived more than a few weeks down there. But if you had money, you could rent what was called a pistola on the first floor. These were former officer lodgings with private space, natural light, and infinitely better conditions. It's a pretty stark reminder of the deeply entrenched class disparities of the era.
Section 3. A serialized sensation and hooking the 19th century reader. You have to understand the publication format was absolutely key to the novel's massive cultural impact. The Count of Monte Cristo wasn't dropped all at once like a modern Netflix binge. No way. Publication began right on the front page of the Journal des Débats in August 1844 and didn't wrap up until January 1846. Can you imagine waiting over a year, reading installment by painful installment, as Dumas kept French readers completely hooked on cliffhangers of violence, unbelievable wealth, and calculated vengeance? He was the absolute master of suspense, and that serialized format made the entire nation hold its breath.
Section 4. The Mechanics of Retribution, a literary deep dive.
So, when we analyze Dantès, we aren't just looking at a guy getting mad and lashing out. We are looking at a character operating strictly through the lens of retributive justice and deep Machiavellian calculation. He doesn't just want to kill his enemies like the real-life Picard did. Oh no, Dantès wants to systematically dismantle their lives, their finances, and their psyches. He essentially turns himself into an instrument of almost divine punishment.
Section 5. Orientalism as a Weapon, the Psychology of Disguise.
So how exactly does Dantès pull this off? He uses disguise for sure.
But not just physical masks. He uses cultural weapons. Dantès relies on a fascinating psychological tactic known as strategic essentialism. In academic terms, this is where an oppressed person deliberately uses stereotypes against their oppressor to exploit societal anxieties. Think about it. Dantès is an outsider, oppressed by French high society, so he intentionally adopts foreign personas, relying really heavily on 19th century French ideas of the Orient, because he knows for a fact it will trigger their deep-seated anxieties and fears. Dumas is actually using these tropes completely subversively to critique the colonizing power structures of his time.
Listen to this vivid description from the text when Dantès assumes his Sinbad the Sailor persona in Italy. Quote, "A Tunisian costume, blood-red pants, Arab weapons with shimmering hilts." Just visualize that for a second. He isn't trying to blend in at all. He's trying to project an aura of absolute dominance and danger. That specific color, blood red, invokes both deep mystery and the immediate threat of violence. He is purposefully dressing as a mythic figure to psychologically overpower the French aristocrats he encounters.
And Dantès executes this psychological warfare flawlessly. First, he exploits French anxieties by weaponizing their fear of the so-called despotic East. When he meets the young French aristocrat Franz, Dantès induces pure terror by forcing him to experience wild hashish dreams. And notice exactly where he does this. He operates in the liminal space of the Italian Sea. It's a stateless space totally untethered to French law, allowing Dantès to strip his enemies of their home court advantage. He completely masters the environment to assert psychological dominance.
Finally, Section 6. The cost of vengeance, losing the self.
To deliver this kind of divine punishment, Dantès has to play a lot of roles. Abbé Busoni, Lord Wilmore, Sinbad the Sailor, and of course, the Count himself. But in doing so, he suffers from what we call abstracted identity. He literally ceases to exist as Edmond Dantès. That young, hopeful sailor we met way back in Chapter 1, he's entirely erased. He achieves his reprisal, sure, but his reliance on so many masks means he totally loses his original human identity.
If you really want to grasp the tragedy of this, contrast Dantès with Georges, the protagonist of an earlier Dumas novel. While Georges also seeks revenge, at the crucial moment, he reveals his true name and finds closure. Dantès, on the other hand, abstracts himself so entirely that he loses individual closure and simply sails away into an ambiguous sunset. By contrasting the two, we clearly see that Dantès' ultimate abstraction actually denies him the personal human satisfaction he spent over a decade plotting to achieve.
Which brings us to Dantès' famous, poignant parting advice to his young friends Morel and Valentine: wait and hope. It's a really powerful, almost tragic phrase coming from a man who did neither. I mean, this is a man who refused to wait, took justice into his own hands, and transformed himself into a literal instrument of ruin. It leaves us with a lingering, provocative question to ask ourselves: is a perfectly executed revenge ever truly possible without sacrificing your own soul in the process? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it completely transformed how you see this timeless masterpiece.